blueprints to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all human beings. SDGs is agreed by approximately 193 countries, including Indonesia, that contain 17 goals and 169 targets, which are global action plans to end poverty, reduce inequality, and protect the environment. SDGs apply to all countries without exception, so all of them have a moral obligation to achieve the goals and also the targets of the SDGs by 2030. In this line, Diponegoro University has committed to take a role in the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action to all countries developed and developing in a global partnership, especially in this area where all of us are still in the battle with the pandemic of COVID-19. The pandemic, according to the latest government report, has spread to nearly 216 countries and territories in the world, with a total of 12 million cases, with more than 500,000 reported deaths. So that COVID-19 is a very dangerous pandemic for all of us. Then we have to work together in coping with this pandemic together. Community activities are restricted in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, and the limitation of these activities has an impact on all fields, including the temporary closure of schools and also universities, tourism activities, which has an impact on more than 91% of students worldwide. Thus, it has reshaped the learning and teaching around the world. Due to the massive school closure, there is a huge interest in distant learning and solution using technology and digital innovation to improve the teaching and learning methods. An essential requirement for shifting from physical classroom to online learning methods creates many implications on urban activities and also future urban management. In this way, we need to discuss about how to achieve SDGs goals, especially number 4, which is to ensure inclusive and quality education with relevant and effective learning outcomes, as well as SDGs goal number 11, sustainable cities and community. As we know, it has direct correlation with the urban activities and future urban management. As a Vice Director for Academics and Students Affairs, I hope the knowledge in this webinar will be transferred, and the discussion in this webinar will give us a glimpse of perspective on how the future education in the sustainable city will look like and how we are going to achieve that goal. At last, I hope that this webinar will be beneficial for all of us, especially the participants and also the speakers, Diponegoro University family, and also ASEAN Development Bank in particular. So enjoy the webinar and hope all of you can take benefit from these activities. Thank you and good morning. So, Mbak Desi, time coming back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Prof. Budi, for your opening speech. The next, we will have the introductory speech from Engineer Bambang Susantono, MSCE PhD. He is the Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development of Asian Development Bank. He is the first Indonesian who are in these positions. He holds a PhD in infrastructure planning and has 2 master's degrees in transportation engineering as well as city and regional planning from the University of California, Berkeley. He graduated as a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from Bandung Institute of Technology, Indonesia. Prior to this position, Dr. Susantono was the acting minister and vice minister of Transportation of Indonesia, Deputy Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development at the Office of Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, and also he was a member of the board for airline, port, telecommunications, and media companies. He received several accolades, including Bintang Mahaputra Utama, Satya Lencana Pembangunan, Satya Lencana Wirakarya, Rekor Muri, Sustainable Leadership Awards, and Top 100 FinTech for SDG Influencer 2019. He chairs several research institutes and taught in university. He is also actively doing research, published several books, and writes articles in the subject of infrastructures, transportations, urban and regional planning, sustainable developments, and climate change. To Dr. Susantono, time is yours.
Thank you, Desi, for a generous introductions. I hope that my connection will be stable, and please show up my presentations.
Yeah, it's on.
Right. So a very good morning to all of you, or perhaps a good afternoon or a good evening, depending on where you're located in the world. It is a great pleasure for me to join this important webinar amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope you are all keeping well, healthy, and also safe. So let me begin by drawing your attention to the 5 drivers of global change, which have increasingly been shaping the world. The success of our effort to combat the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic will in part depend on how well we can leverage these drivers to our advantage. As you can see from the slides, they are technology, urbanizations, demographic changes, climate change, and also labor mobility. ADB is actively doing research in these topics, as you can see also from the cover of reports in the slide. From the 5 drivers, I will focus on 3 of them, which are closely relevant to our discussion of education today. First, the ripple of technologies, which continue to influence almost all parts of our life, some of them helpful, while others disruptive. We do not need to look further for examples than new technology effects on mode of education, as well as job creation or job destructions. ADB report in 2018 on how technology affects jobs in Asia showed that new technologies such as robotic, artificial intelligence, 3-dimensional printing or 3D printing, and the Internet of Things will continue to shape labor market in Asia and the Pacific. Second, we have been witnessing rapid urbanizations across the world, and particularly in our regions. The share of people living in cities in the Asia and Pacific region has increased from 20% in the 1950s to more than half now. 2/3 of global population is expected to live in cities by 2050. Throughout these transformations, cities have and will drive the growth, acting as the main vehicle for poverty reductions and serve as the cradle of innovations. Third is demographic changes. On one hand, some countries in Asia prolong working life. They are facing the need to increase productivity by to do more with fewer people at work and to innovate continuously to help older people work for longer years. On the other hand, there are many other countries that still have young populations with potential for demographic dividends. In both scenarios, more investment are needed in human capital to optimize returns. Ladies and gentlemen, we all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic is a wake-up call for all of us. We must find ways of how we can turn this crisis into an opportunity to address and to redress existing challenges and to reimagine a new normal. Let me share 3 lessons that are relevant to our discussion today. First, the sudden closure of school has forced education system to shift to online learning. While none of us were ready for a disruption of this magnitude, the effect of the pandemic have not been equitable. In fact, students who are suffering the most are the ones with limited means from poorer households. They have taken a higher share of those lagging behind in learning, and they are at higher risk of being left behind further due to uneven or unavailable or unaffordable internet connectivity. How can we ensure learning for all in the area of pandemic? It is high time we took multifaceted approach of using advanced technology and strategic investment in critical areas such as connectivity, digital contents, teacher readiness, and support to parents. Second, many in the workforce have lost their jobs with no immediate prospect for regaining them. Increased competition and changing job market demands mean that more than ever, reskilling and upskilling have become pressing needs. The pandemic has triggered a sudden rise in the demand for skill on certain professions, as well as sharp decline in others. The immediate increase was recorded in health work, e-commerce, logistics, and public works, among others. But more dramatic changes in the job markets could well be on their way. We must continuously innovate to support the skill development to help people cope with these changes, especially among the vulnerable social groups. Third point is on social protections. We are facing a high risk that COVID-19 could reverse our region's hard gain poverty reduction achievement. Now is the time to find innovative ways to protect the most vulnerable through social assistance programs in partnership with employer, private sector, and education and training institutions. Asia and the Pacific has remarkable track record on economic growth, as reflected in the term Asian century, coined for the 21st century. Many developing countries in the regions are growing at impressive rates to reach a middle income level. They have three areas of concern. First, they want to avoid the middle income trap. If the current momentum of growth continues across the region, the projection shows that GDP could reach $148 trillion by 2050. But under the middle income trap scenario, it could stall at as low as $61 trillion. This is where I bring your attention to the importance of sustainable development as enshrined in the global SDGs. Countries are aware that for the Asian century scenario to happen, investment cannot be focused on infrastructure only. Rather, they must be balanced with human capital development, retooling of institutions for good governance, and many other aspects of sustainable development. With high growth in the Asia-Pacific region, inequality is also rising in many countries. To ensure everyone is able to achieve their full potential, it is important to take a life cycle approach of investing in people from an early stage and sustaining that investment. Inclusive human capital development approach must be blended well with other policies, including industrial policy, development planning, and innovation strategy. Third, as countries cope with the immediate effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, they must not lose sight of the need for transformative changes to achieve the SDG. The ADB, UNESCAP, and UNDP report just launched weeks ago highlighted the need for transformations to create sustainable and resilient societies where people are empowered to pursue inclusion and equality. COVID-19 has driven home the importance of these themes, and the SDGs can provide a framework and roadmap as we turn our attentions to the question of how we will weather, live with, and recover from this pandemic. I would like also to highlight two specific challenges faced by ADB developing member countries in education and training sectors. First is despite impressive improvement in access to education at all levels, a significant portions of the population in many countries are not learning at the desired pace or level. In other words, the school attendance rate may have increased, but many students are not able to demonstrate the required competency when finishing school. This is known as the learning crisis. Second related point is that despite the graduates' improved education and training, some employers are unable to fill vacancies. This is because the graduates do not meet the employer's skill requirement, and the graduates, in turn, are unable to find jobs which match their qualifications. This is known as the job skill mismatch. So what does this mean for the future of education and training in Asia and the Pacific? The life cycle approach of improving foundational literacy and numeracy from an early stage must be complemented with lifetime learning of digital skills and soft skills. The old ways of relying on narrowly defined occupational skills are no longer an option. New generation technology, such as adaptive learning and labor maker tools, are providing fresh opportunities to scale up quality and to reduce skill mismatches. On the school side, adaptive learning is helping teachers to understand which students are lagging behind and in what domains. The data generated by adaptive learning technology help teachers and researchers to develop remedial measures that students can use to personalize their learning and sustain improvement at their own pace. Similarly, artificial intelligence tools can generate data from professional job portals to identify how occupations are changing and what skills are becoming more important. This can be matched with individual skills profile to allow job seekers to sharpen their competency in areas where they can enhance. Ladies and gentlemen, these challenges and opportunities for education and skill development need to be analyzed against the background of urban era. There is a two-way process between urbanization and improved education and skill sector. On one hand, education can fuel the dynamism of cities and provide the human resources to drive their transformation into livable cities. On the other hand, the cities offering good urban services, more opportunities for quality jobs, connectivity, and forward-looking environment policies will competitively attract new talents, investment, knowledge, opportunities, and wealth. In the event of high labor mobility, they will push up the demands for high-quality, lifetime learning, to which the urban management must be responsive. As Seoul in the Republic of Korea has demonstrated, and more recently Shenzhen in People's Republic of China, cities can promote innovations and entrepreneurship in new areas, such as green jobs, intelligent transport, digital health, and other essential elements for sustainable urban growth. Realizing this vision of future education and sustainable cities cannot be done by government only or one city alone. Smart partnerships and collaboration are prerequisites in order to avoid costly duplications and to build on emerging innovative good practices. It is important to promote synergies with partners that can bring new ideas, expertise, and financing to work together to scale up good practices in development. Such partnerships can take many forms. One could be what I call public-private people partnership, or P4, bringing together all stakeholders in realizing livable cities. With the advance of technology, direct people participations through social media platform makes it possible to do financing modalities such as crowdfunding. Another could be the university-industry linkages to address the job skill mismatch challenge. I strongly believe that partnership help finding new ways to take on long-standing challenges in unprecedented times. It can help inspire and lay the groundwork for the new approaches to development. This will be essential if we want to build back better and together. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end my remarks by raising three questions for the panel. First, how can technology ensure learning for all and reduce skill mismatch? Second, how can education help countries achieve the SDGs and become more prosperous and happier? And third, what facilities and ecosystem must the city provide to their residents as the enablers of future educations? With this, I thank you, and I look forward to have a fruitful discussions. Over to you again, moderator. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Susantono, for resurfacing the problem that we are facing now. So next presentation's agenda will be led by Dr. Renat Imam Bukhari. So before that, please let me read some of his CVs over here. Yeah. So Prof. Imam is a professor in Urban and Regional Planning, Universitas Diponegoro. He received his bachelor degree in Urban and Regional Planning from Institut Teknologi Bandung, Indonesia, and got his doctor in geometric applications for spatial planning from University of Vecta, Germany. Right now, he He head of the Research Center for Smart City, Faculty of Engineering, Universitas Diponegoro. He also a member and secretary of the Accreditation Council of the National Accreditation Agency for Higher Education Indonesia. Previously, he was a dean of vocational school and also head of Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Faculty of Engineering, Universitas Diponegoro. So without further ado, I handed this event to you, Prof. Imam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Desi. It is an honor for me that the committee asked me to lead this discussion. This very important and interesting discussion, part of international webinar conducted by Diponegoro University and ADB. And today we will present 4 speakers coming from various countries. The first speaker is Dr. BRAJESH, who will talk about the future of education in Asia and the Pacific. And our second speaker is Dr. KANOKPAN LAO-ARAYA. She will talk about education
Professor Imam, you're muted. Can you unmute your mic?
No, udah ini. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry, it's always happened to me. I will repeat. Yes, it is honor for me that the committee asked me to lead this very important and interesting discussion, part of international webinar that conducted by Diponegoro University and ADB. And today we will present 4 speakers here. The first speaker is Dr. BRAJESH, who will talk about the future of education in Asia and the Pacific. And the second speaker is Dr. KANOKPAN LAO-ARAYA, who will talk about education and happiness growth index in Bhutan. And then our third speaker is Dr. WIWANDARI HANDAYANI. She will talk about critical aspects for achieving Goal 4 and 11 of SDGs in Indonesia. And our last speaker is Dr. ASHOK, and he will talk about toward sustainable cities, bringing planning and education closer. And yeah, before start with our first speaker, I will read Dr. BRAJESH CV. Can you show the Dr. BRAJESH is the Chief of Education Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank. He provides technical leadership to the education sector group in ADB, leads the preparation of the education sustainable goals, work plan, and facilities collaboration across sector and thematic groups in ADB and with external partners. He has over 25 years of experience in the education sector, including sector assessment, projecting, processing, implementation, evaluation, and policy dialogue, covering all levels, primary, secondary, technical and vocational education and training, and higher education. He holds a doctorate in education administration, planning, and social policy from Harvard University, US. And besides coordinating and contributing to several publications, Mr. PANTH has made several presentations in different fora and contributed to policy analysis, policy dialogue, and analytical work pertaining to different aspects of education reform. And while listening, I let our panelists also to monitor the QA dialogue on your screen, so you can prepare to answer the questions while listening the presentation. And to maintain our time, I think we start to listen the speech from our first speaker, Dr. BRAJESH, about 15 minutes. Please, Dr. Brajesh, the time is yours. It is still mute.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar today. I hope all of you are keeping well during this pandemic. Education is not just a sector, but a super sector which empowers and enables everyone to reach their full potential. In order to talk about the future of education, it will be good to start with a vision for education. I have listed 3 interrelated goals based on the ongoing debates around improvements in education. First, we want everyone to acquire foundational literacy and numeracy from a very early stage, as the Vice President pointed out earlier. This means no one is left behind. Second, we want education systems to prepare self-directed lifelong learners to thrive in their capacity as a professional entrepreneur or as a global citizen. And third, we want education systems to prepare graduates that fit with the socioeconomic needs of a sustainable, resilient, and innovative society, or who is able to create such an environment. In order to achieve these it is important to focus on realistic targets and reliable mechanisms to measure progress with the participation of key stakeholders. Second, it is important to strengthen government policies through a combination of life cycle approach and whole of government approach, which was mentioned earlier. Use appropriate technologies to combine the power of technology with the creativity and innovation of people to scale up access, quality, and relevance. And fourth, we need to collaborate with different partners locally and internationally to strengthen institutions and expertise needed for reforms and effective implementation. Let's look at the key challenges that the education systems are currently facing in the Asia and Pacific region. I'm highlighting 4 of them. First, most of the people with less than primary education are in the Asia and Pacific region. To accelerate and sustain development, it is important to expand the share of people with more and better education. Second, most of the 15 to 24 age population with low reading proficiency are in this region, which means the quality of education needs to improve substantially. Third, there are substantial skills mismatches this region has compared to the global average. So this is the report from on talent shortage survey by Manpower Group. And fourth, more education does not necessarily translate into higher employment. So it is very important to make education highly relevant and practical. That's very important. Now let's again draw on lessons from COVID-19. There are good lessons coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. For the first time, such a large-scale disruption has happened everywhere. All the education systems were forced to shift to distance learning, but everyone realized how little they were prepared. Online learning and EdTech solutions that were largely prevalent in private education were suddenly mainstream in public education as well. But this shift has revealed several important lessons. First, it has revealed inherent inequities existing in the education systems, that the same students that were lagging behind are at a greater risk of lagging behind further due to inequitable access to internet and related support mechanisms. Multi-channel of learning is therefore important depending on low-tech, mid-tech, and high-tech situations. Second, digital contents and assessments are not readily available for effective distance learning at such a scale. Third, teachers are not prepared to manage distance learning, and they need a lot of support and training. Fourth, the focus of learning shifted from school to home and to parents to support their children. This reinforces the importance of learning not only in school, but outside of school and particularly in home. And we have always talked about how schools are able to explain only 50% of the variation in student learning. So this is very important. Fifth, EdTech solutions that were more confined to private education suddenly got much wider acceptance in public education, thereby underscoring the importance of public-private partnerships for such applications. Sixth, it has become clear that these lessons have to be supported by government policies to apply distance education more systematically by focusing on the promises of EdTech solutions and distance learning. It is also critical to build evidence on these approaches. Finally, it has become clear that distance learning and EdTech solutions are not meant to replace face-to-face learning, but to complement through blended learning to improve teaching and learning based on research and data generated by such approaches. This is the time to rethink and reimagine education. ADB has also joined the global coalition with UNESCO to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. So the main focus of SDG 4 is on improving the quality of education as measured by minimum proficiency in reading and mathematics, what we call foundational literacy and numeracy. As the VP mentioned, many countries are still facing learning crisis, which is when students at grade 3 are not able to even read simple story or do simple math, double-digit subtraction, then that is a good indication of problems with learning. The progress has been very slow. We have been working on this for decades. There is an urgency, therefore, to find innovative approaches to scaling up learning, just like the global initiative to support education for all. It is not only important to bring school-age children, particularly from disadvantaged groups, to school, it is equally important to ensure that all of them complete school with foundational skills. But the strategy that works to improve access may not work to improve learning, because learning requires deepening teaching and learning processes and mobilizing resources to monitor and support learning levels of particularly those that are lagging behind. The good thing is that focusing on foundational literacy and numeracy from an early stage of learning has become more important than ever before. Now, if we look at technical and vocational education, which is another major component, there is a huge demand for technical and vocational education and training to reduce youth unemployment and to support quality jobs. In ADB, over 40% of the pipeline, our pipeline projects, are in Tibet due to high demand from our developing member countries. However, Tibet is generally fragmented with multiple agencies involved, supply-driven and underfunded. It also carries negative image. To address these challenges, we are learning that it is important to mainstream foundational soft and digital skills to ensure that everyone has such skills in addition to occupational skills, particularly if students are coming from weaker school background. Second, closely link TVET with priority sectors such as training for infrastructure. Now, this is even more important for public works, for example. Third, work very closely with industry for dynamic curriculum, in-company training, and professional development, because they are the ones that hire and it has to align with that. Fourth, promote centers of excellence and innovation to demonstrate how good practices work and continue to emulate and spread that. It is also important to identify and develop transformational models such as operate TVET institutions in industry clusters, economic corridors, urban hubs with companies. This is where we're increasingly discussing with governments. Link assessment and certification in partnership with industry associations and accreditation bodies to have universal recognition of that. And third, use artificial intelligence and big data analytics to establish real-time labor market intelligence system. I'll get back to this later. Now let's look at the universities. The role of universities in the human capital value chain is very strategic. Universities foster entrepreneurship and innovation by preparing high-level skills needed for countries to prosper and sustain development. The Asia Pacific region provides a good example of how successful economies have thrived and how universities have contributed to such dramatic changes. Japan, Korea, and Singapore, but also Hong Kong, China, and Taipei, China, and more recently, Shenzhen in the People's Republic of China. We have two speakers, our vice president and also our moderator, both coming from Bandung Institute of Technology, and how it has contributed to the area in terms of development. So we need to build on that. While countries are striving to create world-class universities, it is important to apply the principles well. There are three principles. One is the need to have talent. The concentration of talent is very important. Now, we all know that there are smart students, bright students everywhere, and it's just a matter of providing them with opportunities. But obviously, teachers have to come and develop. But with good students, that also happens. Second is abundant resources, which is not easy. So different options are important. And for example, Indonesia is embarking in a big way on blended online learning to boost enrollment, but also to bring different quality inputs in partnership with potentially other institutions. And third is good governance. The autonomy of university has been the driver behind innovation and attracting talent. There are different innovative models of higher education. One is Korea's Korea Polytechnic University, which supports small and medium enterprises that are unable to do their own research or apply technology adaptation and so on. Similarly, we know about Silicon Valley's different initiatives to apply training with learning. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time on the role of technology. As I noted in the beginning, there is a learning crisis that needs to be addressed with urgency and solidarity. Without the current pace of progress, it will not be possible to achieve the SDG 4.1 goal of improving learning achievements for everyone completing primary education and lower secondary education. For this to happen, technology could play a major role in complementing the education systems. Also, the lessons from COVID-19 are critical to guide this progress. As I emphasized earlier, technology is not meant to replace face-to-face learning, but rather to complement, because interaction is very important. Social interactions and learning are the essence of schooling and education. We have to build on that. I also said that we need to build evidence, but it is important to take calculated risks, given that we have learned a lot from programs like One Laptop Per Child, which were driven more by hardware. But the new generation adaptive learning technology is quite promising, and evidence is also showing good prospects. The main focus is to support all learners to learn at their own pace, since each child is different. Teachers should be able to know how students are learning and where they are facing problems in order to adjust pedagogy accordingly. This technology provides immediate feedback, which teachers can apply and others supporting can analyze to support continuous improvement. EdTech is gradually taking off in Indonesia also. I was reading about two platforms that are doing quite well and look promising, Genius and Ruang Guru. Technology is also very important in workforce development. It is playing a transformational role in workforce development and in reducing skills mismatches. The concept is fairly simple, but the application is now gradually gaining traction. With the use of artificial intelligence and big data analytics, it is now possible to develop real-time labor market intelligence system. Such a system would be able to link three major components. One, in identifying how the occupations and skills are changing by scraping data from different professional job portals and databases. This is increasingly happening, and companies like LinkedIn, JobCred, and others are doing that. Second, in establishing individual skill profiles of job seekers in order to match such profiles with labor market needs to prepare job seekers accordingly. So they also know where they can go with their existing skills and what they have to learn. And finally, third one, find and improve training programs with the active involvement of employers and companies. Part of these efforts need to look at some low-hanging fruits. For instance, we are now discussing a lot about impact of Industry 4.0 on jobs due to automation. Digital skills are critical at all levels of education, and this has been amplified by the current pandemic. Reskilling, upskilling is emerging as one of the largest industries in the world. For instance, Singapore's Skills Future is a good example of how the government is incentivizing people to upskill and reskill continuously to remain current and competitive. Skills Future is also partnering with national and international skills providers, such as the massive open online course providers like Udemy, edX, Coursera, Udacity, and so on. Now let me quickly talk about the framework for EdTech. And I don't want to take too much time, but it is linked with the lessons I shared earlier. So basically, there are 5 pillars. One is the infrastructure pillar, which is now very important to provide connectivity to everyone. And this is like providing textbooks to everyone when we discuss about physical aspects. But the internet access is of bigger importance for the economy because it helps to transition to digital economy, and education is the most effective enabler. Second is government policies. Government, if we can all support government to come up with different needs to position EdTech solutions to complement, it is very important. This includes how to provide affordable and reliable internet connectivity and so on. Schools and teachers need a lot of support, particularly teachers, to prepare. And I mentioned that earlier, with digital skills and management skills, it is possible to substantially improve pedagogy. Parents and students are the next area of importance, where students have to learn not only at school, but before school and after school. And how best to do that than to support parents and provide equip students and parents with such advice and support. Finally, the providers are there, but we need a framework to guide them. And it is very important to bring the best. And we need the mechanism to identify to do that. My next topic is about cross-sectoral collaboration. Education, again, as I mentioned, as a super sector, can support different areas. And this is where whole of government approach becomes very important. One area we are working on in response to growing demand is STEM education. Many jobs, future jobs, require STEM fields. Science and education have been there before, but technology and engineering, design thinking, in terms of inquiry-based experiential learning, these are very important for students to not only be consumers, but co-creators in the future. This is very important for sustainable development. Training for infrastructure. There is so huge demand for infrastructure, and this is a good way of preparing students and so on. So there are other areas I've listed here which are very important for high growth sectors for many countries. So as a way forward, this is my last slide. I just want to reemphasize that given the lessons we are learning and given the slow progress we're seeing in learning, education, EdTech solutions appear to be very promising, but we have to build evidence and use these solutions to complement through a evidence-based approach. Second, research and data-driven approach is very important to guide the system and to make sure that we are making progress. If measurement is weak, then it's very difficult to sustain progress. The life cycle approach, I don't want to elaborate, Vice President has already mentioned about it, but it is starting early and preparing lifelong learners. Learning to learn is so important, and the foundation starts very early. Fourth, the whole of government approach. What we have seen successful countries like Korea doing include blending education with industrial policy, with investment policy, and with innovation policy. This is so important because, again, education is the biggest enabler in this process. And finally, we cannot reinvent without working with others, without partnering with others. There are excellent examples of good models, and this is the time to optimize that. So with that, thank you very much for this opportunity. Back to you, Prof.
Thank you, Dr. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pans. And for the participants who would like to ask, you can use the question and answer dialogue. Please address your question, whom it is directed. And we will jump to the second speaker, Dr. KANOKPAN LAO-ARAYA. She is a country coordinator, Bhutan Resident Mission, ASEAN Development Bank. Dr. KANOKPAN, a national of Thailand, has more than 25 years of professional experience working on development and economic issues across the Asia-Pacific region. She holds doctorate and master's degrees in economics from the Indiana University, Bloomington, USA, and a bachelor's degree in economics from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. Prior to joining ASEAN Development Bank in July 2001, she worked as an economist at the Fiscal Policy Office of the Ministry of Finance in Thailand for 3.5 years. In the country director's capacity, she leads the planning, implementation, and supervision of the Bhutan Residence Mission's visions, goals, strategies, and work plan in support of overall ADB goals. Before assuming the current position, she worked in the Resource Management Unit of Strategy and Policy Department in ADB headquarters in Manila, Philippines. After her field assignments with ADB to handle country operations and knowledge work in ADB fields and offices in Sydney, Beijing, and Vietnam. Her specialized fields include public financial management, public administration reform, private sector development, and resource-based management. Okay, let we hear about Dr. KANOKPAN's presentation, and I will give the screen to Dr. KANOKPAN for 15 minutes. Please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iman. Good morning, participants, Vice Rector and VP Bambang. It's my honor to be here. I'm going to share my screen on my presentation.
Okay.
Well, this morning, the topic of my discussion is on the education and cross-national happiness. I'm now the country director of Bhutan Resident Mission for ADB. And when you think of Bhutan, a lot of people think of a cross-national happiness, which is used as a philosophy in the country development. From the speakers earlier, as you can see, a couple of things that I want to highlight. Number one, education is an effective equalizer for everyone. Even small country like Bhutan, one thing that is a concern is about equity. Even though the country has developed very fast, but one concern is about disparity among citizens, that the growth hasn't been the benefit from growth throughout 3 decades haven't been distributed evenly. And second, that I would like to echo what Dr. PANTH mentioned is about education is super sector. And these link back to ADB VP Bambang, who talk about how SDG can take us to happy and prosperous. And this part, I would like to emphasize on this concept of education as super sector is that it is not just a sector. It is so important that all the SDGs have to be linked. Education integration with urban development is very important. So I'm just going to jump to the my outline. I'm not going to read it through, just go into the next interest of time. So briefly about gross national happiness, it is the philosophy that the Bhutan government has used for development since early 1970s. So this is the quality, it's about the quality and holistic development, which balance between material and spiritual development. And this concept has been incorporated in the country's 5-year plan. The country medium-term plan has been used for ADB formulation of our country partnership strategy for our assistance to the country. And in terms of gross national happiness pillar, it covered 4 main pillars: good governance, sustainable economic development, preservation and promotion of culture, and environmental conservation. So I'm moved on to education in Bhutan. Because happiness is a foundation for development, one thing that is important is the country and the government has pursued universal access of education. The government provides free education to grade 12 and thereafter based on merit. That is, if the student has passing grade, then they can get free education. Strengthening and the education in Bhutan lately has been geared towards strengthening foundation for learning and development of literacy and numeracy and skill work, lifelong learning, similar to the recommendation that earlier speakers have presented. And one thing that is quite unique in Bhutan is the school emphasized the value of education and mental health. One of the unique things is the government has introduced a meditation in school since 2011. However, now we are in the COVID-19 era. One thing that Bhutan is still a developing country and it has a limited infrastructure, ICT infrastructure. There are limited equipment, infrastructure, translating into limited use of ICT equipment and online curriculum prior to COVID pandemic. And that led to the adverse impact that since early March until end June, and even now, the school is not open fully. It's still open for only grade 11 and 12. For other grades, they will be open in stages. So there are about 170,000 children are not attending school. This is for the country that is very small. Bhutan's population is only 760,000 people. So you can see there are massive burden for into learning distantly, given the limited infrastructure that we have. So the government has launched an e-learning program to bring the teachers teaching on the television studio and broadcast lesson on the national TV and radio broadcast using the tele-education. But this is also limited. It doesn't fully replace or equal to the quantity and quality of the time that have been used during the normal time, because each session is only 30 minutes, and they have to lump several grades together, grade 1, 2, 3 material will be presented together. And however, that it went on, and it's been supplemented by various online tools such as Google Classroom, e-textbook, e-access, and self-instruction manual. And school teachers also have one-on-one and some small groups using the smartphone applications like WhatsApp and WeChat. This has been used pre-COVID. It's quite popular, but the frequency and the intensity has increased since COVID pandemic. However, this phenomenon emphasize the digital divide, because a lot of students living in remote area, they do not have reliable to the online, or some family doesn't have TV or so on. So this poses a big challenge. Other concern of COVID-19 also in Bhutan, also about physical and psychological well-being of isolated students, that also adverse impact on female students in terms of a possibility to do more household chore, risk of not continuing school, and also the quality of education as mentioned. In terms of, with all this challenge and concern, the government has also just launched the roadmap, economic roadmap called 12th Century Economic Roadmap. And ADB, as part of development partner groups, also provide inputs into this roadmap. And one thing that I like to share and emphasize here is a lot of topic that we discussed in this 21st century economic and social for 21st century economy and society in Bhutan has a lot to do with topics that we discussed today about digital infrastructure and transformation, and how to use ICT enable in knowledge-based economy. And also about social innovation and leverage frontier technology to leapfrog in development. There are other enablers include evidence-based decision-making and for effective policy. I'm not gonna list all these items, and we'll just jump to the next topic because all these slides will be shared with you. But one thing that is unique, and I think I would like to share with the participants, that one of the 3 questions that our Vice President Nambang has posed is how city can respond to education. In this case, Bhutan is a landlocked small country, and there is very limited flat land. And one initiative that ADB has been using in our operations in urban development projects is called land pooling scheme. This is a scheme that we use for land management that allow a robust and efficient use and increase the value. So far, we have done the pilot. The idea is when people have land area, but they are scattered and not developed, but each landowner can gather together and allocate part of their land, like in Bhutan, not more than 30%. And then there will be a replotting of the land, so that there would be, like in this figure that you see, as an example, like on the left-hand side, the land might be such as that, and there's only common pass-through, common use passage in the middle there. But then when we pull it together, and there will be a rearranging of the land, the landowner might receive less area of land, but then the planning will be better, so that there will be a communal use of land for green park or other facility. And then this would allow the commune use for share public service such as parks. And in this case, as you know, the digital divide has an impact on people who are disadvantaged, and some communal use can include some learning center that city can provide, such as kiosks or area where students can use can access to learn. For not just students, we are also talking about lifelong learning that people in the community can use, and this would provide effective service to people who live in the community. So so this idea came from our urban development, and this came back to the statement that I mentioned earlier, that even for sustainable development goals, we cannot look at it in the silo manner. Even as SDG 4, education can link with SDG 11, which is about sustainable cities, and also SDG 12 about responsible consumption by applying some scheme such as this. So I have only one last slide to close. To respond to future education in Bhutan and ensure that people and align with the national gross happiness, the country needs to enhance the e-learning program and improve internet access, reliability, and affordability. Importantly, is first and foremost is to invest in communication infrastructure and technology, and it is very important to integrate the online learning method in urban planning. There are various ways by provide secure wireless connectivity throughout the city, and have a kiosk and learning centers for free access to internet, especially for disadvantaged people, and use of Internet of Things of technology. As time go by, it's possible free internet hotspot around the city would be very beneficial. Last but not least is the response should include the modernization of curriculum by enhancing quality of education. So I will end my presentation here, and will welcome question and answer later. Thank you very much. And this is the picture of one of the forts in Punakha, in the center of the city. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kanokpan, for your presentation. And yeah, we will go to the third speaker, Dr. WIWANDARI Handayani. She is an associate professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Diponegoro University. And she is also head of Laboratory of Regional Development and Environmental Management. She graduated with a bachelor degree in Urban and Regional Planning from Diponegoro University, and master degrees in Urban and Regional Planning from Institut Teknologi Bandung, and Population Studies from ANU Australia, and hold a doctoral degree from the University of Stuttgart, Germany, in Regional Development Planning. She has been engaged with works related to urban sustainability and resilience since 2011, and she was in the team of ASEAN Cities Climate Change Resilience Network Rockefeller Program in Semarang City, performed as M&A coordinator for several projects implemented in 2011 to 2014. Okay, I will give the screen to Dr. Wiwandari to present her topic for about 15 minutes. Dr. Wiwandari, the time is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Imam. I hope you can hear my voice clearly.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would like to share some ideas about Goal 4 and Goal 11 of SDGs in Indonesia. Yeah, good morning, all of the webinar participants, the Vice Rectors, Pak Bambang from the ADB, all the organizing committee. It was really attract my attention when in the first meeting of this webinar 2 weeks ago, we discussed about the connection between Goal 4 and 11, because, you know, as Prof. Imam has introduced me, actually my background is urban and regional planning, and I mostly work with Goal 11, but it was really attract my attention to connect this with Goal 4, because I know that the success of the achievement of the Goal of 11 will be very much depend on the Goal 4, on education, people awareness, knowledge, and skills is very important. That is also a reason why I would like to start my presentation with a brief background and context on the interlink between the SDGs 4 and 11, and also the cross-cutting issues. I will talk more about the condition in Indonesia, some highlighted discourse. I would like to propose an idea on quality of life, and of course the importance of people education, some critical aspect related with urban containment and governance. And as a way forward, I would like to focus on the adaptive city concept as a container, and also knowledge and smart city as the content to ensure the sustainability cities, yeah, for the future. Yeah. Of course, I know that all of you already familiar with the SDG 4. It's related with the quality education, and SDGs 11 is more about the sustainable cities. As an input, as I've described from the slide, of course, education is very fundamental aspect. The successful of the education will give people knowledge and skill to participate in development and maintaining more sustainable cities, well prepared to achieve a more resilience and address any disaster situations. In another way around, cities also contribute a very important input to ensuring the achievement of the quality of education. As I've mentioned earlier, cities with a more adaptive approach need to provide a better public facilities and services to meet certain level of quality of life. And cities need to be able to provide facilities to address various disturbance. But it cannot be standalone. It should support also by a good contain under the concept of knowledge and smart city concept to encourage and nurture focused innovation, science, and creativity, of course, within the context of an expanding knowledge economy and society. I would like to highlight the cross-cutting issues, starting with the idea of the urbanization. I would like to again raise your awareness that we are now live in the age of urbanization. The global population tripled between 1915 to 2015. As you know, there will be 71% of us will live in cities, yeah, in the future. And based on the data from the United Nations, we know that 1.5 million people are added to the global of urban population every week. And most of them concentrated, of course, in Asia. The problem is the urbanization is not happened evenly distributed in the whole part of the world. It's only concentrated in particular area everywhere, including in Indonesia, where most of the urbanization happening in the northern coast of Java Island. All this situation leads to physical geographical challenges and also socioeconomic challenges, because the undistributed urbanization, it leads to the urban carrying capacity. At the moment, we face a lot of urban which already exceed the capacity to develop. Most people from the lagging regions, from the smaller cities, from the rural, they move to the bigger cities, trying to improve their economic condition, and it creates a higher informality in urban area, leads to the urban poverty issues. And again, it leads to the education issues, because access to education, equality to access to education become emerging issues that need to be addressed. In the end of these cross-cutting issues, I would like to highlight two important problems that need to be addressed. That at the moment, most of the cities experience low quality of life because of this rapid urbanization, and we need to do a lot of homework to make it a better quality of life for the people who live in many cities in developing countries. And also, it is related with the human behavior, human capital, human education, because the knowledge, the behavior at the moment may lead to the situation of the environmental crisis because of the low awareness of them. I would like to now provide a kind of glimpse of condition in Indonesia. So yeah, this is the map of the Java Island. Just to give you a brief idea, in Indonesia we have 270 million population, and almost 70% of them live in Java Island, which might be more than 150 million population. Whilst Java Island is only like 7 or 8% of the total Indonesian. So you can imagine how dense Java Island is. In Java Island itself, the development very concentrated in the northern coast. I provide you some data on the table. As you know, Jakarta, Surabaya, Semarang, like the biggest three cities, mega cities along the northern coast, develop very rapidly. So you can imagine, out of 270 million of people in Indonesia living in Jakarta and its surrounding, it's already like more than 30 million. So it's a very, very unbalanced development, unbalanced population distribution, and it creates what I mentioned earlier about the exit of the urban carrying capacity. And it happens, I'm sure, not only in Indonesia, but also in many other countries, mostly in Asia. And yeah, I just want to show you a glimpse. This is the study from my colleague from the Department of Marine and Fishery Department in Undip, in collaboration with, of course, other institutions, that because of this rapid urbanization, we experience also problems related with climate change. This is a combination between the sea level rise issues and the urbanization that leads to the land subsidence, for example. This is the situation in 2009, and you know, about 20 years from now, some of the area, because of the sea level rise and it getting worse because of the urbanization, will have problem with, I call it as sinking Java. This is Semarang city, so you can imagine some of the Semarang city will have these problems because of the exceeding of the urban carrying capacity, because the undistributed population distribution. The situation getting worse in the 60 years and 100 years. What I would like to show you from this situation is just to raise our awareness that we need to do something to control the urbanization, to ensure that we can maintain the environment, and of course, to that part, we need education, people knowledge, and people awareness contribute significantly in the process. All the situation, I try to sum up all the glimpse in Indonesia with some emerging problems and issues. And I call it as an urgent call to create better urban environment and sustainable urbanization. In terms of physical and geographical situation, we face all the disaster, increasing disaster. Urbanization leads to the additional water demand, and it creates also land subsidence issues. In addition to various climate-related disasters happening in most northern cities in Java, and also in most in cities, could be in Indonesia, in other part of the world. And the situation is also added by the economic, social problems like slum, poverty, and unemployment. As you can see, I select some data to show you that some big cities in Indonesia is also face issues related with, unemployed situation, like in Surabaya, in Bekasi. Bekasi is the neighboring cities of Jakarta. Each city has problem not only in disaster, physical, geographical, but also problems related with the social and economic situation. It happens without COVID. And with COVID, of course, it creates more shocks. A lot of discussion has been happening, this COVID as a shocking situation around the world. And it shows that the denser cities are more vulnerable because there are more people, more poor people. We have problems with the access to the public facility, including access to education. Professor Dr. BRAJESH and Dr. KANOKPAN already mentioned a lot about how the education influence, the quality is influenced by the COVID. And I'm sure more shocks is experienced, a lot of cities related with this, especially because most of the metropolitan area in Asia, including Indonesia, already consists of different local governments. So not only one single governance. It means we need more cooperation and collaboration to be better managed, to coordinate and collaborate to address this situation. To address all those challenges, then I would like again recall our mind on the basic principles of the sustainable cities. That again, I believe that significant effort to improve quality of life is very, very important to prepare future cities that provide safety and comfort for the people. It will include physical, social, environment, economic, and institutional features. Cities need to provide not only with a better environment, but also supported activity where people can interact with each other, can communicate, and can develop their local potential optimally. And hopefully it will help to improve the people awareness on the environmental issues. I like to raise two main issues related with the importance of people education in building sustainable cities. First is related on the transportation sector. I choose this because, transportation generates the largest share of the greenhouse gas emissions. And, because of lack of understanding, lack of awareness, now there's a lot of children, they go to school using motorcycle. It is dangerous, and of course it's not safe. Another example is on the waste management, because we end up realizing that actually lack of public awareness on waste is one of the biggest problems on the flooding risk in Indonesia. So in the end of the day, all the intervention to build sustainable cities will end up with the importance of the people awareness, with people education and skills to maintain their neighborhood, their cities. And I hope I don't run too much of time. I would like to summarize the critical aspect to address all the issues, accommodating the importance of the SDGs 11 and SDGs 4. The first one is regarding with the growth management. Like it or not, we need to have capacity to maintain the city size of our cities, because the maintaining of the city size will significantly reduce level of complexity, and it will help people to address many urban problems. It will be better managed to improve the quality of life, and of course, including attempts to reduce the urban poverty. But it will not work without the proper governance system. I would like to underline the importance of broader participation and strengthening collaboration. I believe social learning process for people is very important to promote the sustainable cities through the active participation of the development actors within the city. And we also need to be creative and innovative to get more funding options and other support to ensure all the activities or intervention to make our cities more vulnerable becomes comprehensive and, of course, sustainable. As a way forward to end up my presentation, I would like to propose two big concepts to ensuring the sustainability of our cities, in combining with the importance of education as a fundamental part of the process. The first, I would like to promote the adaptive city. It's very interesting that Pak Bambang and Dr. Brajesh already mentioned about adaptive learning, but of course, we can apply that for the city. We need to create an adaptive city through the spanning by design. I just give you a brief illustration. It is describe the existing situations and also the hope for the future. Basically, the idea is cities need to become a living labs that help people to solve urban design challenges. Through the inclusive citizens involvement, it will ensure the availability of urban space that suits to the needs and characteristics of the community. And public awareness can be encouraged through the provision of adequate public services. That is why I give you another example on the pedestrian. Pedestrian, it is expected that by providing good pedestrian, for example, that it will motivate people to walk rather than going to school by motorcycle. And of course, it needs support, need to be supported by a good regulations, like school zoning and so on. It means cross-sectoral approach is also very important. The second way forward that I would like to propose is related with the concept of knowledge-based and smart city. I believe the container and content should help each other. The urban design planning without supporting by a learning process will not achieve in optimally, and that is why in the content perspective we need to keep developing the idea of knowledge base and smart city. I provide one example from initiative from the local organization in Semarang, Hysteria, in collaboration with other local institutions. We have local activities to promote, to elaborate the history of the kampung, and inviting all the children to see and raising the awareness of to preserve the neighborhood. And I think activities like this will become a good content to promote the participation of the development actors and also people awareness. Yeah, so I end up with at least 5 types of learning that it's very important to continuing our effort to achieve the SDGs 11 and 4. learning to know, learning to critique, learning to bring about change, learning to be, and learning to care. I will stop here, looking forward for the question and answer. Thank you very much, Prof. Imam.
Thank you, Dr. Wiwandari. And yeah, we will go to our last speaker. Sorry, I'm not a good timekeeper because the presentation were very interesting, so it is not wise for me to cut the presentation. Okay, Dr. Ashok Das. Dr. Ashok Das is an associate professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, University of Hawaii at Minoa, USA. He is also an affiliate faculty of UHN Center for Southeast Asian Studies and Center for South Asian Studies. He was co-chair of the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning's Global Planning Educators Interest Group, appointed by President of ACSP. He now serves on the new ACSP Global Planning Education Committee. He received his PhD in urban planning from the University of California, Los Angeles, Master of Arts and Master of Art in Environmental Planning and Management from Kansas State University, and Bachelor of Art from Bachelor of Arts from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Previously, he was an assistant professor in the San Francisco State University's Department of Urban Studies and Planning, an architecture and planning consultant in the United States and India, and the chief cartoonist for Architecture and Design, India's leading architecture magazine. Yes, you have so many. Okay. I will give you 15 minutes to present your topic, and now the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bokhari. And let me just get my screen on first. Hopefully, wait, I should share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So, distinguished educators from the Universitas Diponegoro in Semarang, Dr. Bambang Susantono, Vice President of ADB, Drs. PANTH and LAO-ARAYA, and Dr. Handayani, my fellow presenters. It's really a pleasure and honor to be participating with you all in this webinar. So thank you very much for inviting me. Also thankful to all the attendees who have been very patient, waiting till the end for this presentation. So the advantage of going at the end is that a lot of the basics have been reiterated multiple times, so I can really breeze through that. The disadvantage is that I don't really know what I'm going to contribute, since all my esteemed colleagues have already said most of the good things. So, but I'll nevertheless try to add a little bit more to this conversation. So, as the topic of my presentation suggests, I'm trying to make a case for urban planning and education as a sector to work together more closer, in the hopes that the Sustainable Development Goals will be attained better. So, for those of us who work in the urban development, urban planning arenas, education as a development goal has always seemed to be secondary or even distant as compared to some of the other sectoral goals that are more prominent and are more pressing, it seems. However, several multilateral agencies like the ADB, for example, have been pursuing education as a goal for a long time, but still the education planning connection is still weak. Other multilateral larger organizations like the World Bank, for instance, haven't really, I would say, in my opinion, pursued education as purposefully or as strongly, because it was only in 2018, just 2 years ago, that for the first time, what their flagship annual publication, the World Development Report, focused on education. So that's some of the background. So as most of you know, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Because of the nature of urban planning today, which is very multidisciplinary and multi-scalar, it's very comprehensive. And it has become very interdisciplinary in terms of its education and training. So almost all the Sustainable Development Goals in some form or other or rather planning in some form or other is connected to almost all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Even the United Nations itself acknowledges several, over half a dozen, other goals like 1, 6, 7, 8, which is like reducing poverty, clean water and sanitation, energy, and several others, which have a direct connection to goal number 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. Several others are also acknowledged as having direct links to, or substantial links to, goal number 11. The few which probably seem to have less connection or weak connections to sustainable communities, cities and communities, are maybe goals 14 and 16, life below water and peace, justice and strong institutions, although I don't think so. And also goal number 4, it has probably very less ostensible or very apparent connections with each other, but I'm trying to argue that it's not true. So anyway, so with this background, SDG 11 is Sustainable Development Goal number 11 is the one that deals with cities, and hence it's the one that urban planning as a profession, as a discipline, is most directly sort of engaged with, or is squarely dependent on urban planning. Now, it's not something new. The agenda for urban sustainable development goes back, at least till about 1992, when after the Earth Summit, Agenda 21 was launched, and there one small section of it was dedicated towards sustainable development of cities. And it also emphasized education in terms of human resource development and capacity building for overall human settlements development. So there was a connection between cities planning and education even back then. The latest push, or the strongest push now, is through the new urban agenda, which was adopted in 2016 at the Habitat 3 conference in Quito. Now, this explicitly talks about certain goals for sustainable urbanization, and those are, or certain components of sustainable development, which are equity and social justice and access to public goods in the public sphere. These two are very equally shared between, I think, Sustainable Development 4, the education goal, and the Sustainable Cities goal. So there's definitely a very, very strong connection. Now, overall, in terms of how planning looks at the issue of sustainability or urban sustainability, one of the ways to look at it, this is the popular conceptualization by Scott Campbell, a planning theorist at the University of Michigan, who says that, sustainability lies at the center of a triangle, if you can imagine, where one vertex is economic development, the other one is environmental protection, and the third one is equity and social justice. So it is between the tensions of these vertices that planners have to operate in their quest for sustainability. So just to keep in mind, but it's also important how the triangle is oriented. It's oriented in a way that equity and social justice is the top vertex. So that, suggests, or at least exhorts planners and development specialists to place more, if not equal, emphasis on social justice and equity. Okay, so now with COVID-19, as you already know, this has been repeated multiple times here. Dr. Susantono introduced this idea of learning crisis and learning poverty, right? So the problem here is that the existing inequality and the existing disparity is huge in terms of learning. So the learning crisis is that 260 million people, or children around the world, are not even going to school. And you already know what learning poverty means, and the learning crisis, not being able to read or do math at a certain level, by the time you're, say, age 10. So these are real crises, and this shows a gap between poor countries and rich countries, but also within countries, right? Now, there's another interesting thing, which is there's a lot of evidence that tells you how and tells us how education is very central to human capital development, and that is very important towards wealth accumulation. That shows you the disparity. It's a significant disparity between wealth accumulation in the poorer countries and the richer countries, right? And of course, the impossibility or the great challenge with remote learning has been emphasized by my fellow presenters before. So although it is an aspirational goal, but realistically speaking, it is very distant for many people today. So this map that you're seeing in front of you, it shows, the red shows all those countries where schools were closed entirely, okay, during this pandemic crisis. And overall, over 1.1 billion students worldwide have been affected by this. Again, so these are the two goals. Again, the similarity between SDG 4 and SDG 11, I mean, the most striking ones are in terms of the emphasis on inclusiveness and equitable development or social equity, right? Now, the problems here are that, it's the learning crisis, which is a problem. And in terms of sustainable development goals, 90% of COVID cases have been in urban areas, okay? And globally, about 24%, a quarter of the urban population lives in slums, meaning in very bad conditions. So inclusivity and equity are big challenges and mutual concerns for both the goals. Okay, so now why am I talking about planning and education? That is because planning's purpose is to serve the public good. Its origins lie in public health crises like typhoid and cholera crises, as well as other kinds of health issues caused by overcrowding and housing in the late 19th and the early 20th century in the industrializing cities of Europe and in the US, for example. Now today, since then, planning has evolved as a very essential exercise that helps in providing public and merit goods, which includes things like public health and public education, and these ought to be provided efficiently, sustainably, equitably, and inclusively. In developing countries, planning has been used reasonably effectively in many cases to improve the lives of the poorest people through efforts such as slum upgrading, which cover a lot of goals, from like physical development goals to economic development goals and social human development goals. Now, when you're working with more educated communities, this is easier to do. And these kinds of initiatives themselves have some focus on education, although small, mostly focused on pre-primary and adult learning. So there is a link, a strong link that exists, although it is not as acknowledged. Okay, now the discipline of planning itself, I mean, the academic discipline of planning has changed quite a bit, and hence through planning research and accumulated knowledge, planning wisdom is quite different today. So there are certain very significant shifts in terms of expanding the foci of planning from purely spatial or economic development to including social, cultural, and legal issues of planning, from just privileging efficiency and effectiveness in urban development to also, or even more sort of emphasis on equity, empowerment, and justice. In terms of the actual approaches of how planning is done, from focusing on physical design and systems-based modeling to increasingly participatory and collaborative kind of processes involving communities, from using it as a very technocratic and top-down exclusive kind of endeavor to one that is increasingly decentralized, bottom-up, and community-based and community-driven, from changing the role of the planner as the expert to that of the facilitator to that of the social learner, as Dr. Handayani just mentioned before me. And also, so those are some of the shifts. You can read the other ones on the slide, you can read them later maybe. Epistemological shifts are also significant, I mean, in how they have shaped or changed planning. So it has moved away from this rational positivism, or it's trying to move away, at least, from rational positivism to embracing ideas of plurality of ideas, as well as indigenous knowledge, and using those things, and these are very relevant to developing country context, so that they can decolonize Western frameworks, perspectives, and practices which dominate the way planning is done in contemporary societies. And most importantly, in recent times, whereas maybe 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, I mean, in developing countries particularly, and also elsewhere, the planning's main sort of objective was to sort of prevent informality. Today, we acknowledge that it is to work with informality. What is important, and before I move on, what is important to remember here is that with more and more research being done on this area, we have realized that planning, that informality is a product of the way we do modern planning. It is not something that is alien to it. It is a consequence of the inadequacies of planning. So anyway, so, we've talked about how urbanization is happening. So on this slide about global urbanization, you can see that the top two curves represent the lowest income and the lower middle income countries, and those will continue to be steeply rising as compared to the other two, although their percentage of urbanization is still lower, but they will continue to grow beyond 2050 because they'll only reach about 50% urbanization by then. The problem with this rapid urbanization and the inadequacies of planning so far has been the rapid increase in informality. So on this chart, as you can see, at the bottom, the bar that you see, horizontal bar, is the world average. So about 44% of the world's population, works in the informal sector. In continents like Africa, it is over 3/4 of the population. In the Asia Pacific, almost 50%, although in South Asia, it's almost 80%. So the problems with informal employment is that it is largely invisible to official data and to official circles, because they're not even counted or they're not even considered, because mostly they're deemed to be illegal. So there are no safety nets for these most vulnerable groups. They have few welfare benefits. And interestingly, many of them cannot even afford shelter in the informal settlements like slums and squatter settlements. So you see a lot of homelessness also, because informal settlements are also a separate parallel real estate market. Now, the people in this COVID-19 crisis, during this COVID-19 crisis, who have been hit first and the worst are those who are working in the informal sector. So this economic crisis that is looming or we are going through is most significantly impacting those in the informal sector. And there's very little relief that is going towards them. And we've seen pictures from India, for example, and many other countries where migrants have had to migrate back, and there's a painful exodus. Similarly, the other significant aspect of informality is in the housing or the residential sector. So most people who work in the informal sector also live in the informal sector. So this graph shows you that the dark downward sloping curve tells you that over time, the proportion of slum dwellers or those who live in informal settlements has decreased, yet the absolute numbers have increased significantly, right? So it is still a big, and so this is something to do with urbanization, because urbanization has been good overall for reducing urban poverty, particularly in Asia Pacific, mainly because of the declines achieved by China and also to some extent a big country like India. Yet, despite this, in almost every Asian country, in almost every developing city of Asia, the inequality gap has increased. That means the access and the capacities of the privileged versus the less privileged has been increasing. So that's, the inequality is growing despite lowering of poverty, for instance. Now, the problem that COVID-19 has very squarely and frontally sort of placed in front of us is that poor water and sanitation access in the slums means that a lot of the health and hygiene sort of practices are near impossible. Similarly, social distancing is impossible because of the kind of overcrowding that exists in most of these dense settlements. Lastly, in terms of education, homeschooling is infeasible. It is not only because they lack access to remote learning in terms of infrastructure or say money, or Wi-Fi connectivity or electricity, but because the conditions in these homes is inconducive to learning when you are 10 people inside a room and your parents are also not working, and so there's general mood of sort of despair. It's not a conducive learning environment. So this is really hurting the people who live in informal settlement. Okay, so moving on. So the objective is to so I'm going to concentrate mostly in whatever I'm going to say. I'm implying that I'm talking about the most vulnerable populations in our cities, which are those who are in the informal sector, unless I mention otherwise. So one of the key planning challenges today, or an objective, is that we should have more community development of these poorer neighborhoods, and we should work more with poor communities. Now, one of the requirements or prerequisites to that is to appreciate the interconnectedness of multiple goals development. So the health, education, youth, employment, and crime sort of nexus. One thing affects the other. So unless we understand the interconnectedness, our sporadic efforts to quell or stem poverty and inequality will not be very successful, particularly because these are exacerbated by informality. Now, why do planning institutions struggle to achieve equitable, inclusive, or just outcomes? It is because planning yet does not understand very well migration dynamics and informality. And that is why there is, criminalization as well as discrimination against migrants in most developing cities of the world. Also, planning, training, or education does not impart the necessary knowledge, skills, and resources to engage with poor communities, but that is what is the biggest need of the hour. Also, when planning becomes more participatory, everyone participates. So the perceptions, prejudice, and poor information of the privileged sections of society leads to what is called NIMBYism, or not in my backyard syndrome. So the privileged people don't want to deal with, poorer groups and, allow the dedication of resources towards those ends. Finally, there's very negligible engagement of planning the way the profession works with education, youth, and crime and juvenile delinquency related issues. Okay, so what has been planning's involvement with education? It's been pretty limited. So mostly the direct link through planning and land use planning is the allocation of space and siting of education institutions. So Dr. LAO-ARAYA nicely mentioned the example of land readjustment, which is one of the ways where planning has a direct influence on creating sort of space and possibility for things like education and health. Mostly the allocation of space for planning leads to the, for education leads to the development of schools most commonly, and these are mostly public schools. Planned space for private institutions by comparison is very less, or it's very less planned, and it is very, very scarce in poor neighborhoods. Now, planning can actually play a much more extensive and meaningful role with education, because a lot of evidence from even Western countries and more developed countries shows that when you mix students from different backgrounds, from different socioeconomic backgrounds, it improves learning outcomes and facilitates social mobility. Singapore is a classic example of that, where it is done very purposefully. So planners can enable more mixed use and more mixed income neighborhoods. They can create, planning in other arenas can lead to more equitable development altogether, so that land prices and property prices don't rise very high, people are not priced out. And so this can have, I would say, not indirect but direct effects on learning and education. Similarly, land use and transportation planning, one of the biggest concerns is to maintain what is called the jobs housing balance, and which is what a lot of development in cities in recent decades has not been achieving very well. I would say this should become the jobs housing and education balance, because that's also very important. Now, in terms of the informal shelter, side of the problem, educational institutions like school have a lot of surplus land in many cities, public schools, Those could be used more effectively for building affordable housing for the poor and those who are in the informal sector. There's one thought there. Similarly, the spaces in public schools can be used for other kinds of community purposes and amenities, which are very hard to come by in informal sector areas, and these can be sports facilities, space for socio-cultural functions, urban agriculture, local markets, etc. In the very crammed informal settlements, planning can play a role in facilitating smarter design for low-cost schools through better aesthetics, space utilization, and also sustainable practices. Similarly, a lot of the community involvement that has happened in planning and the shared sort of participatory kind of planning, those lessons can be used to engage local communities, I'm talking about poor communities, to be also more involved in managing the local schools, for example. Okay, now I said that if planning has to work together with communities, then the community should also be very prepared, right? So having an aware and civic-minded citizenry is invaluable. However, society's general understanding and awareness of what is planning is very weak. Okay, even people who go to college, many of them don't know what is urban planning, for example. So schools can help children become more aware of planning by learning about, for example, its role in pursuing sustainability, resilience, and climate change action, talking about food security and the role of, and practicing the role of urban and peri-urban agriculture, giving children opportunities to engage in collective decision-making and shared governance, and also introducing them to the informal sector through service learning, for example. So these will make more prepared and more sort of informed, well-rounded citizens who can engage better with planning. Now, let's talk about the education of planners themselves. So with this rising urbanization, with the increasing complexity of cities as they become, because of globalization, migration, as they become more and more multicultural and complex, the demand for planners is rising worldwide. And it is estimated that it will rise faster than many other professions for at least another 10 years to 15 years, right? However, the other side is that there's a huge shortage of planners in developing countries. So whereas their urbanization challenged the actual sheer scale of urbanization, the complexities are far greater than those of the richer countries, the number of planners they have is much less. So for example, a recent survey found that there are 215, on average, 215 urban planners for about 1 million population in the OECD countries, that is the rich countries club. By contrast, in the developing countries of the Commonwealth, they have on average 20 or less. So that's like a 10-fold difference there, whereas the actual problem is many times more. Let's take the case of a big country like India, right? The third or fourth supposedly largest economy in the world today. India has 28 states and 8 union territories, okay, which are like smaller states governed by the central government. But it has only 27 recognized planning programs today. That red corner that you see is called is the northeast region of India. It's comprised of 8 states. There is only one planning program in those 8 states, and that also started just in 2018. So the education of planners is grossly, inadequate in terms of quantity. Now let's talk about quality of the education of planners, right? If we want to overcome these challenges of urban poverty and informality, and we want to see more synergy between Sustainable Development Goals 4 and 11, then it has to be, the planning education needs to be upgraded and made more relevant and sensitive to context. That means reducing the traditional emphasis on technical, quantitative modeling and physical planning skills in the curricula, to emphasizing interdisciplinary learning more about the social sciences, understanding about equity, inclusivity, diversity, social and spatial justice, and so on. So developing an appreciation for the role of history, theory, and criticism in improving one's own profession, for example. Now, most of the planning, history, theory, and criticism that exists today is mostly Western. So developing countries need to develop country-focused and region-focused contextual scholarship if it has to be meaningful, right? The practicum kind of courses, meaning which give you more sort of simulation of the real world, those kinds of programs should introduce students to the nuances of the informal sector, because ultimately that is the biggest challenge that they'll be facing. Also, in order to do that, develop contextual scholarship, or introduce to the informal sector, we have to learn by doing, and that means working with those people who are already engaged in these things. These are community representatives, activists, non-profit organizations, and other scholars from other disciplines who work on these things. Similarly, if you want to do more participatory and collaborative planning, then it is also going to raise the possibilities of conflict. So planners must be trained in doing outreach, facilitation, mediation, and conflict resolution skills. So also, in terms of understanding how you work with other institutional players like civil society actors and the non-profit sector is also very important. So these are some of the things that are very essential, I think, towards improving the quality of education for planners. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm running a little bit over time, I guess, but I'm wrapping up very quickly. So in terms of how this planning and education sort of relationship has been better informed by the experiences of COVID-19, right? So we have, now it's a fact, we have seen this, that COVID-19's impact is hardest on those who live and work in the informal sector, right? Because of this, the two goals, goal 4 and goal 11, are going to be probably the most impacted, because how significantly their progress depends on the success of dealing with the informal sector. Now, emerging research has, for the last couple of decades, been showing, or at least the last decade or so, has been showing a nuanced understanding of urbanization processes and migration dynamics in developing countries. This is very important for planners and other administrators to learn. This suggests very strongly that urban policies and planning should not ignore or exclude the informal sector and informality, let alone punish it or criminalize it. But that is what is the prevalent practice in most places. Now, it's the responsibility, I think, of planning scholars, educators, and practicing planners to push policymakers, because they can't be expected to know about a lot of this emerging research, for example, that I just talked about, And so that they can recognize the urgency to acknowledge, map, meaning know the scale of the informal sector issue, problem, and what are the issues in that, support the informal sector and work together with them. Why is this important? Because Dharavi, many of you probably have heard of this famous or infamous slum, which is considered to be one of the world's largest and densest slums in Mumbai, which was featured in the famous Hollywood film Slumdog Millionaire. Interestingly, has flattened the COVID-19 curve in the last 3 months. Whereas the city of Mumbai in which it is located, has not been able to do so, right? It has had far better performance in terms of managing COVID-19 than the big city, right? And how has that been possible? I reckon it is because of its long history of collaborative planning through city, civil society, and community efforts.
Sorry, Dr. ASHOK, please aware the time.
Oh, sure. Okay, thank you so much. So planning and education institutions should seize this opportunity. This opportunity, this unfortunate, pandemic, but the opportunity is, I think, is great to develop a synergistic approach towards inclusive, equitable, and sustainable urban development. And I think I'll stop with that. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. ASHOK. And yeah, very interesting. There are many questions coming from participants. And unfortunately, we only have about 20 minutes for answering those questions. So I think I will give about 5 minutes to every speaker to answer those questions. But you can summarize the questions directed to you, and then please answer them in about 5 minutes. Let's start with our first panelist, Dr. BRAJESH. Please answer the questions directed to you in about 5 minutes. Dr. BRAJESH.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, I have tried to answer most of the questions through the chat box. But the question relate to pretty much about jobs, disparity, and in terms of partnership with MOOCs, and also readiness for reopening schools. So I think what is important for us is context is very different. But overall, if we look at the trend and based on our experience for the MOOCs and online learning, that is going to happen and progress anyway. And Indonesia is already embarking on large-scale online learning, blended learning program for universities. The same infrastructure can also support all levels of learning, including digital skills that are required. And that strong monitoring system will also help to pick and choose the best for the country. I think that's very important. On the reopening of schools, it is, again, very important to learn lessons. There are three dimensions. One is the economic dimension, which clearly shows adverse impact on the economy for over protracted closure of schools. But then if we look at health sector, that is very important. It is important to link with the context. So even within a country, some locations may be ready to restart schools, which need to be done through a guideline mechanism at the national level, which can then provide guidelines to local, accordingly, but with a strong monitoring system and support system. If that is not there, then it may be very difficult. In terms of the increased violence within households and also difficult to cope with the situation, I think the country director also responded quite well. First, it's important to recognize and have a support mechanism. But for the long term, it is also important to shift our focus to understand households better to reduce disparity. And I think that is a major lesson for us, because if children are at home, parents may not be able to go to work also. That affects that very much. So somehow these are interlinked, and we need to work in tandem with the government and employers. So I'll stop there. If there is anything else, I'll be happy to respond. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Brajesh Pan. Sorry, I missed. There is also a question directed to Pak Bambang. Pak Bambang, are you still there? There is a question for you.
Oh, okay. So I try to do my best. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it is written on the screen. Can you see it?
Yeah. Just
okay,
one,
yeah.
This one
okay.
is yeah.
Okay.
We understand and we recognize the different. There is no one size fits all policies in trying to develop a country, a particular community, or a city. So we have to be very careful in trying to cook the policy mix. For us, there is no single policy that can solve the urban problem, for example. We have to do that in a more comprehensive and integrated way. And for us in ADB, usually we try to do what we call the bigger nexus. If Dr. ASHOK or Professor ASHOK mentioned about nexus thing, now a nexus is more complicated. We are not talking only, for example, on the transport, energy, and cities, or transport, energy, cities, and rural area, but we also try to have another social dimensions like gender empowerment. This is for women and also the children. We also add more climate change and environment. We have to do a climate proofing of all our projects. And for that, ADB always screen all the project based on not only what we call the social and environmental and climate change dimensions, but also we screen about the gender participation, for example, that has to be there so that it's clear in the project itself that this project will create, for example, so many jobs for the women and stuff like that. So my short answer is that we address this difference in many cities, many areas, and many countries, and we always try to make a balance between economic efficiency, environmental and social feasibility, as well as the equality, meaning that we always put more attention for the disadvantaged and the poor society that have to be addressed in a particular program. I think I stop there. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Pak Dr. Bambang Susantono. And yeah, there are also some questions for Dr. KANOKPAN LAO-ARAYA. Please answer in about 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. For this question, for the first one, the education lead to most modernization. But in Bhutan, it's all integrated. All the students in the curriculum collaborate in terms of learning tradition is part of the curriculum, and they participated in a lot of festivity and celebration. So those are incorporated in normal school education. The tradition in Bhutan is very strong. In terms of inequality of learning and technology access, there are various technology and infrastructure that local government and the government has collaborated. That in rural area we set up some learning center that students, even they don't have their own infrastructure, but they can use the center, community center, to access learning materials. The last one, one-on-one education, this question I'm not sure what are you talking about. If you refer to the training and more individual based, as I mentioned in the presentation, some student who need special help, the teacher has used existing platform of smartphone application, and they communicate with parents to help support the student in learning, so that they can pick up the speed. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kanokpan. And let's jump to Dr. Wiwandari to answer about 3 questions in about 5 minutes. This time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Imam. The questions related with the different cases of people affected by COVID-19 in different cities, for example, between Tokyo and New York. Yeah, so basically, the most important, there's of course a lot of influential factors, but I think the number one influential factors is, of course, the response from the initial response from the public or the public policy to take to deal with the situation. And in resilience perspective, in brief, I would like to say the different numbers very much depend on how the city will deal with a more proactive initiative rather than to the reactive initiative. So you can check cities with lower number of the affected COVID, they have in general better proactive initiative, not reactive. So they have an initial good preparation to deal with this kind of big shocks in the city. And yeah, I live in Semarang, and it's really quite very challenging to all of us that at the moment we are now in the red zone. And yeah, Semarang's mostly attributed as one of the resilient city in Indonesia. And it's really challenged all of the stakeholders, because I believe the most important part is, of course, the awareness of the people. We cannot deal with the situation alone, but we need participation of all stakeholders. That is why public awareness is very important. And I hope with this awareness, we can promote Semarang to be more resilient in the future. Yeah, the last questions, is there any, do you have design of anti-pandemic public spaces that can be used? Yeah, there, I think it's the issues of COVID-19 is really call of a lot of research from the academics, from the university, and we believe there will be a lot of discourse about that. And public spaces indeed is a very important issues, and I'm sure in the very near future there will a lot of discussion and publication talk about that. And yeah, Semarang, and I also have some ongoing work. Looking forward to share that with you and other people to share and to learn each other. I think, yeah, that's my response, Prof. Imam. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Dr. Wiwandari. And lastly, I will ask Dr. ASHOK to answer the questions directed to you. Please, 5 minutes.
Sure. There's this question on bringing, that the need to bring education and planning closer is good, but it's difficult. And how can we convince policymakers in other national city governments too? It's not very difficult, I would say. It is difficult, but it's not very difficult because we have to find allies who will do this. So in many countries, you have civil society organizations and nonprofits who are also struggling with the same issues, and they're saying the same things. So I think joining forces with civil society actors, so the universities, scholars, as well as other activists and non-profit actors joining together, can present a front. So the role of planners is to provide platforms maybe where these kinds of conversations can happen at the city level or even at the sub-city level, at the neighborhood level. And eventually this will hopefully reach the ears of the policymakers, and I mean they'll be able to get their attention. At the same time, I think planning education institutions have a big responsibility in their training of their students, because if they train students who are rightly and adequately prepared in terms of the interdisciplinarity of their jobs, in terms of appreciating the informal sector's challenges, and also bold enough and creative enough to come up with alternative solutions, then I think slowly the institutions of planning will also get, they'll get populated by individuals with creative visions, and it might automatically change things. So that's the long-term plan, I think. The second thing is, can we make a better situation for informal jobs or the informal sector? Yeah, I think the job of or the responsibility of getting the informal sector workers to be better educated and better prepared, that squarely falls in the court of the education sector, I think. So national governments and regional and local governments have to think about the education policies so that the quality of education imparted to the poorest people in our society can be better. But for the existing people who are already in the informal sector, planning and urban policies can be better by being more inclusive. For example, in most countries, I mean, like say in China, you had the hukou system. So, I mean, you did not, if you were a poor migrant worker, you didn't have any access to, say, government provided education or government provided health. In Indonesia, it is very common in most cities that if you don't have a KTP, then you don't get access to free primary education or free primary health. Although there are examples of cities which are doing it differently, right? So in most cities, in most countries of the world, most of the informal sector workers do not get any access to this. However, their contribution to the economy of the city is astounding. It ranges anywhere from like 25 to 30% across the world to maybe about upwards of 70-80% in some of the poorer countries of Africa and also in Asia, for instance, right? So despite their huge contribution, we treat them as people who don't belong and who are outsiders. And like I said, it is partly to do with our misunderstanding of what the contribution of the informal sector is, why the informal sector develops in the first place, and why we should not sort of exclude it. I think so a general understanding of that on the part of the planners, on policymakers, and the larger citizenry in general, I think will help us to deal with informal sector issues better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. ASHOK. And yeah, before closing this session, I will read some concluding remarks as a result of our discussion today. Our seminar has addressed three key questions driven by Dr. Susantono. The first is, how can technology ensure learning for all and reduce skill mismatch? And the second is, how can education enable all SDGs to help countries to become prosperous and happy? And the third question is, how can cities better respond to the future of education, and what are impacts to urban planning and management? For this, Dr. BRAJESH has highlighted some key features of our education sector in the future that emphasize on foundational literacy and numeracy for early stage, preparing self-directed long life learners, and addressing the mismatch through collaboration between TVET, university, and industry. There will be increasing use of research and monitoring to measure learning and target improvement, government policies to support whole education's life cycle, to coming of new generations of technology that will be blended in education. Learning technology is imperative, although face-to-face learning remains important and cannot be totally ignored. Although education, one of important pillars in SDGs, has been a concern of multilateral institutions, engagement with urban planning still weak. This COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the existing inequality in education sector. The ability of governments, both at the national and city levels, for considering and then integrating critical aspects of future educations, such as addressing inequality that prevents inclusive and equitable access to learning technology, plays a significant role to shape sustainable city nations and sustainable urbanizations. Planning interventions to promote inclusive education and sustainable urbanizations make difference depending on the context. However, some ideas have featured in our discussion highlighted by our speakers, such as mixing students of different socioeconomic backgrounds, promote job housing education in urban planning, develop communal learning centers in already developed neighborhoods, such as through land pooling or consolidation. It is a best practice in Bhutan. Decentralizing learning facilities, provide access point for educational materials in urban public spaces, promote multi-use of public school, particularly in surrounding poor neighborhoods, new standard or design that respond the community needs and new learning culture for its citizens, and increase participation of community in school management. Those are some listed important notes that can be gathered from this discussion. All these points need to be considered by planning discipline at the university, and to somehow upgrading planning education's curricula is required as deemed by Dr. ASHOK Das. These points are also essential for urban planning professionals and practitioners, which remain limited given the tremendous increase of urbanization. In broader context, the university has a key role in anticipating future education. Some priority areas for reforms are open for the government and universities, as deemed by Dr. BRAJESH earlier, and education technology framework should assist this transition better. Those are some concluding remarks that can be gathered from this discussion today. And thank you for participants' attention, and also to our speakers, our panelists. And sorry that I cannot keep the time well, and I will send the screen back to Dr. Desi. Dr. Desi, please.
Thank you, Prof. Imam. Such inspiring and prominent discussions we have here today, and thank you so much for this speakers as well. So before really closing the event, I would like to send some acknowledgement. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to acknowledge the executive board of Universitas Diponegoro, our rector, Professor Dr. Yos Johan Utama. Thank you so much for the support. And we also would like to thank Vice President for Asian Development Bank, Dr. Bambang Susantono. Thank you so much for your time and also for your support. For the speakers, to Dr. BRAJESH PANTH, Dr. KANOKPAN LAO-ARAYA, Dr. WIWANDARI HANDAYANI, and Dr. ASHOK Das. Thank you so much for your valuable insight, and thanks for sharing the presentations with us today. To the moderator, of course, Prof. Imam Bukhari, thank you so much. And for all the organizing committee from ADB and also Undip, they are Mr. Cahyadi Indrananto, Professor Denny, Dr. Ruku, Dr. Diana, Dr. Albari, Pak Slamet, Mbak Kenny, Bu Susi, Bu Ita, dan juga Chandra. Thank you so much. And finally, to the attendees, thank you for your participations today. We hope that this webinar will bring the inspirations and also the positive impact for all of us. We also would like to apologize for some technical issues appeared during the webinar. We look forward for seeing all of you in the next event, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Bambang. Thank you so much, Dr. ASHOK.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Brajesh, and also Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Prof.